A PNP is a pediatric nurse practitioner.
We can diagnose, treat, prescribe, just like a doctor would, but with the touch of a nurse.
Kids A to C with the PNPs. G is for Courtney.
Hi everyone, welcome to Kids A to Z with the PNPs.
Where each week we take a closer look at some of the common health problems affecting our kids.
We're your hosts. I'm Dominique.
And I'm Courtney. And today we're going to talk about the letter J, and the letter J is for journey, and we're going to talk about my personal journey through postpartum depression and anxiety.
So what is postpartum depression?
So postpartum depression, which we'll get into a little bit more detail later, is basically depression or symptoms of sadness after having a baby. The CDC reports that postpartum depression affects about, on average, 1 in 9 women, but depending on race, ethnicity, those numbers can be higher, and in some states it can affect up to 1 in 5 women.
So we'll talk a little bit about what the difference between postpartum depression and the baby blues are. So the baby blues usually occur a couple days after giving birth. They're these kind of up and down feelings of emotion. One time, you're really feeling really happy and excited, enjoying motherhood, and the next minute you're crying and stressed and feeling, are you up to the task of taking care of a new infant? These symptoms usually occur within a couple days after having the baby, and then they'll actually get better after a week or two. The baby blues are caused from hormone levels dropping after giving birth. This is very common and can happen up to between 70 to 80% of women. Combined with those hormone levels dropping, being a new mom, lack of sleep, these feelings can be very overwhelming. But I think the most important thing to note here with the baby blues, they will get better after a couple of weeks.
So if you find that these feelings aren't getting better after a few weeks, or they're actually getting worse, you may be experiencing postpartum depression. Postpartum depression is something more serious, where you have feelings of like hopelessness, worthlessness, guilt, feeling inadequate. It may interrupt your sleep more than just having a newborn. You may have difficulty eating, or it may affect your appetite. It can affect your personal relationships. So basically, it's something that's more serious and gets worse and not better. I want to also take a minute to talk about postpartum anxiety, because I feel like we talk a lot about postpartum depression, but postpartum anxiety is also a phenomenon. It can happen with or without postpartum depression, but usually happens with. It is feelings of like anxiousness, restlessness, nervousness, racing thoughts. You can have heart palpitations, nausea, feeling like you're having panic attacks, or kind of like an overwhelming feeling of dread.
The last component of this is postpartum psychosis, which is much more serious and much
more rare.
And this includes hallucinations, delusions, extremely high and low moods, feelings of wanting to hurt yourself or hurt your baby. If you or your loved one or a partner is experiencing these symptoms, you want to seek medical attention immediately. So Courtney, do you want to share some of your experiences that you've had with postpartum depression?
Yeah, I would. And this is something that I think is a little bit difficult to talk about for me personally, because I feel like it's a very personal story, but also a very important one. So basically, when I was pregnant with my first child, I had a very normal, healthy pregnancy. I was excited. I was ready to be a mom. That was like the number one thing that I wanted to be in my life. I had my baby. She was here. After a couple of days with her, I went home and I started feeling not quite myself. I started feeling anxious whenever the baby was crying. I felt like whenever she cried, it was because I wasn't doing something right. I felt like maybe I wasn't cut out for this. Like, oh my God, did I just make the biggest mistake of my life by becoming a mother? And these are honest, real feelings that I really felt. And that manifested for me as feelings of intense sadness. I was crying for no reason at all. My poor husband had no idea what was going on. And neither did I, for that matter. But periods of like sadness, crying, I was withdrawing from friends and family. I didn't want people coming over to visit the baby. People wanted to bring me food. They wanted to meet the baby, and I had said, like, just leave the food on the porch because I didn't know what was happening to me. I wasn't eating, I wasn't sleeping. I felt like I was at the lowest point in my life, if I'm being honest. And prior to that, I really hadn't experienced mental health issues. I was lucky enough to not have experienced depression or anything like that before. So I didn't know exactly what was happening, and I didn't appreciate the fact that your thoughts and feelings can actually have a physical impact on your body. It can make your heart race, it can make your hands and feet numb, and I didn't realize that I was experiencing panic attacks. I felt frozen in my bed. I didn't want to move. It was just overwhelming, and to have something happening to your body that you can't talk yourself out of and you can't rationalize with yourself because I didn't know what was wrong. Truthfully, I kind of think about it as when if you're driving fast in a car and you have to slam on your brakes for an animal, the animal is the threat. The threat is your safety, that you're going to harm yourself. But in this instance, my body was acting as if there was a threat, but there really was no threat, and I didn't know what was wrong in order to fix it. So that was the point where I decided to see my doctor, she had no idea what she was expecting with that visit. I was just a blubbery mess, and she ended up putting me on some medications for depression and anxiety. And it was a long journey, but one that if I'm being truthful with myself, probably took me till she was about a year old before I really felt confident in Courtney again. I was absolutely terrified to have another child, and a few years later I became pregnant with my second. And I was petrified that this was going to happen again. But this time was very different for me. I had a plan in place. I went and talked to my doctor. We had medications already lined up just to start before I even started showing any symptoms. And I saw a psychologist. I saw a therapist for about 4 to 6 months after having her. So I had my baby, I started my medications, and the symptoms happened again. And I actually felt like this time it was far worse. But I also felt more prepared, and I felt like I had a safety net. And also my husband had been through this before, my family had been through this before, so they kind of knew what to expect and better ways that they could help me. So what I will tell you made all the difference with my second child versus my first was that I sought the help of a professional psychologist. And I don't think that there's any stigma in saying that. That was the best decision I ever made. And I was the biggest skeptic for doing that at first. I said, what is this guy gonna do for me? I need medications. This is a hormonal imbalance, right? How is talking about my feelings and my experiences gonna make things better? It made all the difference. And I felt after about 4 to 6 months of seeing him, I felt like myself again, and I said, don't need you anymore, but thanks for everything. And so every person, every woman that experiences this is going to have their own, they're gonna have their own story and their own experiences, and mine might not necessarily be what another woman experienced, but I'm hoping that we can break the stigma, because I felt so very alone as I was going through this, and it would have been great to know that somebody else has been there before.
It's what I'm hearing you say is, you know, as health providers, we know these symptoms, we know these things can happen, but it's, you know, postpartum depression doesn't have a face. It can happen to anyone, whether you're prepared or you think you're educated or you know.
And especially me working in the pediatric field, parents would come to me with these problems, and I solve problems about kids. And for me to be a mother and feel like I couldn't solve this problem for my child was very difficult for me. So something that has changed the way that I practice and the way that I interact with my patients and with people in general, women who've just had children. When you're pregnant, people ask you how you're doing all the time. Once the baby comes out, they ask, how is the baby doing? Don't forget about mom. Ask her how she's doing. My husband will tell you that anytime one of his colleagues or friends has a baby, he says, how's your wife? And that's something
He's learned.
He's learned, yeah. Like, make sure you check on her because these people don't like to talk about it. So I think the take-home message is it's okay not to be okay, and we need to talk about these things so people don't feel so alone.
Thank you so much for sharing your story with us.
I hope it helped somebody because I would have loved to feel like somebody understood what I was going through when I was going through it. So I think we're going to wrap it up now.
If you guys have any questions or concerns, comment below. You can always email us at kidsa2z@dmc.org. Like this video, share it. Next week is the letter K, and we'll be talking about keeping kids safe.
Okay. See you then.
Thanks for watching.